They say when your heart's broken, you either drown in the noise or run toward silence. I chose the latter. It wasn't one single thing that made me pack my hiking boots and disappear into the wilderness. It was everything. A breakup that left me hollow, a job that felt more like a cage than a career, and this constant, gnawing feeling that I'd become a ghost in my own life. 28 and already burned out. I didn't want to talk it through, didn't want advice or pity, or another half-hearted, "You'll feel better soon." I wanted to feel nothing, or maybe just something that was real again. So, I threw a few essentials into a weathered pack: tent, water filter, journal I hadn't touched in months, and drove 6 hours north to the mountains. The trail I picked wasn't famous. That was the point. No crowds, no tourists with Bluetooth speakers strapped to their hips. Just me, the woods, and time. The ranger had warned me it was remote and unpredictable, but that sounded perfect. He asked if I was hiking alone. I nodded. He asked if I had a plan. I lied and said yes. The moment I stepped onto the trail, the noise of the world softened. Cell signal vanished, traffic faded, and even the tension in my shoulders began to loosen. The canopy of evergreens overhead filtered the sun into soft shafts of light. It smelled like moss and damp bark and something ancient I couldn't name. I breathed it in like medicine. Each step away from the trailhead felt like a layer of myself peeling off. The emails, the texts, the silent treatment from my ex, the fake smiles at work. Out here, none of it mattered. The crunch of dirt and twigs beneath my boots was the only sound I needed. I walked until my thighs ached and my shirt clung with sweat. I wasn't aiming for anything in particular. There was no summit I had to reach. Just the act of moving forward felt good enough. Around mid-afternoon, I found a clearing beside a stream and set up my tent. It wasn't much, but it felt like mine. I made some instant coffee on my little camp stove and sat on a flat rock watching the water flow. There wasn't a single voice to interrupt my thoughts. And oddly, I didn't miss them. That first night, I slept hard. Not because I was at peace, but because I was exhausted, mentally, physically, emotionally. But even in that stillness, something inside me stirred. I woke to birdsong and soft morning light and realized I hadn't checked my phone in over 12 hours. That had to be a record. Day 2 was even quieter. I passed no one on the trail, which suited me just fine. I hiked deeper into the forest, deeper into myself. The trees towered around me like silent witnesses, offering no judgment, only shade. Occasionally, a deer would dart past or a squirrel would chatter from a branch above, reminding me I wasn't entirely alone. I kept walking, letting my mind unravel as I moved. Memories surfaced. The last fight with Dylan. Him saying, "You always run when things get hard." Maybe he was right, but staying hadn't helped either. He wanted me to be someone more confident, more ambitious. I wanted him to see me, not some version of me that looked better on paper. By late afternoon, the sky began to change. At first, it was subtle. A wind shifted direction. The birds quieted. Then came the low, distant grumble of thunder. I looked up and saw the tree canopy darkening as thick clouds rolled in faster than I expected. I checked my GPS, no service of course, and scanned the map I'd half-heartedly tucked into my side pocket. I wasn't near any established shelters, and my tent was still a 2-hour hike behind me. I picked up the pace, trying to ignore the way the air thickened and the forest hushed. There's a moment, right before a storm, when the world holds its breath. I felt it then, not just in the weather, but in me too. A stillness before something changes. Then the first drop hit my forehead. Cold, sharp, then another. Then the sky opened up. The rain wasn't gentle. It was torrential sheets of water that soaked me through in seconds. My pack grew heavy, boots sloshing with every step. The trail disappeared under mud and rushing water. My heart pounded as I realized I couldn't go back, and I didn't know how far forward the path led.
Panik crept in fast irrational.
I'd wanted solitude, but not this. Not the disorientation, not the fear. The storm didn't care about my reasons for being out here. I stumbled, slipping on a rock, catching myself just before I face-planted into a thicket. My palms stung. My breath came in shallow bursts. The trees blurred. I wasn't sure if it was the rain or my own tears. And then, through the chaos, a flicker. A light, small, distant, but steady. Moving through the storm, coming closer. I froze, heart racing. For a second, I wondered if I was hallucinating. But then I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on wet leaves. A voice called out, low, calm, unmistakably real. Hey, you okay? I turned toward the sound, and that's when I saw him, soaking wet, holding a flashlight and wearing a weathered green jacket. He looked like he belonged out here, like he knew the woods in a way I never would. His eyes were sharp, focused, but kind. He stepped forward, offered a hand. Come on. I've got shelter not far from here. I hesitated only a second before I took it. I thought I was walking away from everything. I didn't know I was about to walk into something entirely new. The rain came down like it had a vendetta. 1 minute the forest was quiet, peaceful, even gentle, and the next it was roaring with wind and water that pounded the earth in angry sheets. The trees swayed violently above me, their branches creaking like they might snap at any second. Visibility dropped so fast I couldn't see more than a few yards ahead. My clothes clung to my body, water seeping into every layer, and each step I took sank ankle-deep into cold, rushing mud. I turned back the way I came, hoping to retrace my steps to the small streamside clearing I'd camped in. But the trail was gone. The soft path I'd followed so easily just hours earlier was now a wash of water, leaves, and debris. My heart pounded, and not just from exertion. I was alone, cold, and already starting to shiver. The air felt thinner somehow, like the storm had stolen all the oxygen out of it. A gust of wind knocked me sideways and I stumbled, my foot sliding on a slick patch of moss. I went down hard on my side, the world tilting as I hit the muddy slope and skidded a few feet before catching myself against a fallen branch. My ribs ached, my palms stung. I coughed, sputtering on rain that had made its way into my mouth. For a moment, I just lay there, frozen. Not from the cold, but from fear. What the hell was I doing out here? I didn't even tell anyone exactly where I was going. No cell signal, no backup plan. I thought I was being brave, independent, whatever. But right now I felt stupid. Then, through the chaos, I saw it. A light, faint, flickering, but unmistakable. A flashlight beam slicing through the downpour, cutting a soft path in the darkness ahead. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I blinked, wiped rain from my eyes, but the light held steady, and it was moving toward me. Then I heard a voice. Firm, calm, male. Hey, you all right? I pushed myself to my knees, squinting into the storm. The light got closer until a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a forest green jacket that looked as soaked as mine. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the rain, and even from 10 feet away, I could see the scruff of a beard and a pair of focused, concerned eyes. Yeah, I think so, I called back, my voice hoarse. You're gonna freeze if you stay out here, he said, taking a step closer. Come on, I've got a cabin nearby. A part of me hesitated. Every survival tip I'd ever read in a clickbait article flashed through my head. Don't go with strangers. Trust your gut. But the truth was, I couldn't feel my gut or my fingers. And this stranger had light, warmth, and a voice that cut through the fear like it belonged in this place. He reached down, offered me a hand. I took it without thinking. His grip was strong, steady. He pulled me to my feet like it was nothing. I winced as I stood. My side ached from the fall, but I could walk. He kept the flashlight pointed forward, leading us off the main trail and through a thicket I hadn't noticed earlier. Name's Wes, he said as we walked. Been up here a while. Storm like this'll pass, but not before it chews up every trail in sight. Thanks, I muttered out of breath. I didn't think it would hit this hard. Mountain storms don't send invitations, he replied with a shrug. They just show up and wreck your plans. I couldn't help but laugh a little. Maybe from nerves, maybe from the ridiculousness of it all. The cabin came into view not long after. Small and dark-stained, nestled between two moss-covered boulders, it looked more like something from a storybook than a place someone actually lived in. A narrow porch wrapped around the front, and a faint glow escaped from the single window. He pushed the door open and gestured me in. Get inside. Strip off the wet stuff. Fire's going. The warmth hit me instantly. Inside, the cabin smelled like cedar and smoke. A cast iron stove crackled in the corner, casting a golden glow across the wooden floor. A few shelves lined the walls, stacked with books and canned food. A heavy wool blanket was draped over the arm of a well-worn leather chair. The place was simple, but it felt safe. Wes shut the door behind us and hung his coat on a nail by the entry. There's a towel in the back room. Extra clothes too if you need 'em. Won't win any fashion awards, but they're dry. I mumbled another thank you and shuffled off to the back, peeling off my soaked shirt with effort. My hands trembled, not just from the cold anymore, but from the adrenaline still leaving my system. I found the towel, dried off as best I could, and pulled on a flannel that smelled faintly of pine and smoke. When I came back out, Wes had poured hot water into 2 tin mugs and was crouched by the stove, tossing in another log. He looked up and nodded toward the armchair. Sit, drink. You'll feel human again in about 10 minutes. I did as I was told. The mug warmed my fingers and the tea, whatever kind it was, soothed my throat instantly. Thanks, I said again, softer this time. Really, I didn't know if I was going to make it out there. He glanced over from the fire. You would've, but you might have hated yourself by morning. I managed a smile and he returned it, just a flicker at the corners of his mouth, but it stayed. Why were you out here? He asked, finally sitting on a wooden crate near the fire. I paused. That was a longer answer than I was ready to give. Instead, I just said, needed space. City was getting too loud. He nodded like he understood more than I'd said. Well, he said after a beat, you found quiet. I looked around the tiny cabin, listened to the rain still drumming on the roof, the fire crackling in the silence, and the steady, comforting presence of the man across from me. The fire popped and crackled like it was telling its own story. I sat in the armchair, mug in hand, wrapped in the wool blanket Wes had tossed my way. The dampness had finally left my skin, but not yet my bones. Still, compared to where I'd been an hour ago, shivering, soaked, and halfway to panic, I felt like I was in a sanctuary. Wes moved around the small cabin with ease, as if every corner and creak had become a part of him. He wasn't overly talkative, but he didn't feel distant either. There was a quiet confidence in him, the kind you don't learn from books or podcasts or therapy. It was earned through silence, time, and probably a little pain. You good? He asked, looking up from the stove where he was fiddling with the kettle again. Yeah, I said, nodding, still thawing out, but yeah, thanks, again. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. Wes shrugged like it was nothing. I check the trailhead when storms roll in. You'd be surprised how often people get caught out there. I raised an eyebrow. So you're like, what, Forest Batman? That earned me the smallest chuckle from him. Something like that, except I wear fewer capes. There was something disarming about him. Maybe it was the way he moved without making noise, or how he didn't try to fill silence with small talk like most people. He didn't seem to mind the space between words. It made me want to lean into it. So, I ventured, do you live up here full time? For now, he replied, settling onto the wooden crate by the fire again. Been a few months. Off-grid by choice? Mostly, he said, nodding. Sometimes the world feels too loud, you know? I needed to step back, think, breathe. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. He glanced over at me, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes, like recognition. You from the city? He asked. Yeah. San Diego? I said, setting the mug down on the floor beside me. Well, just outside of it. This overwhelming lately. Breakup, work burnout, all of it stacked up until I couldn't hear myself think. He gave a small, understanding grunt. Same here, he said. Lived in Denver for years. Thought I had it all figured out, job, apartment, people. Then life hit the brakes on me. Lost someone. then the job, then just everything slowed down. Sorry, I said gently. Don't be, he replied. It's strange, but the quiet helped me hear things I'd been ignoring for years. Out here, there's nothing to perform for, just the trees, the wind, my own voice. I exhaled, almost laughing through my nose. That sounds terrifying. It was, at first. We sat with that for a moment. The fire hissed and spit as another log cracked in half. Rain still tapped steadily on the roof, but it had softened into more of a whisper than a roar. Is it lonely? I asked, not sure if I meant the cabin or the healing. Wes looked into the fire. Sometimes, but it's an honest kind of lonely. Doesn't feel like you're being left behind. Just alone with yourself, which, turns out, is sometimes the hardest person to be with. His words landed deeper than I expected. I felt my throat tighten a little. Yeah, I said quietly. I know that feeling. Another silence stretched out between us, but this one wasn't awkward. It felt comfortable, shared, like two men sitting on opposite ends of the same long chapter. I glanced over at him again, trying to study him without being obvious. His beard was a few days grown, his hands rough and calloused like someone who chopped wood instead of typing passwords. He looked like someone who'd done his share of surviving, but not in a hard or broken way. More like someone who'd chosen peace and meant it. And still, I couldn't figure out if his kindness was just kindness, or something more. Was he offering shelter because he was a decent man? Or because he saw something in me that echoed something in him? I didn't dare ask. Eventually, Wes stood and stretched, his flannel rising just enough to flash a sliver of skin at his waist before he tugged it back down. Bedroom's through there, he said, nodding toward a door near the back. Bed's yours for the night. I'll take the couch. Oh no, really? I can sleep in here. You could, he said, but you'd wake up with a sore neck and a draft. Trust me. I've done it. I hesitated, then gave in. All right. Thank you. He nodded once and started clearing the mugs, moving efficiently but without rush. I stood, gathering the blanket tighter around me, and stepped toward the hallway. Wes, I said, pausing at the doorway. He looked up. I know I keep saying it, but thank you, not just for pulling me out of the rain, but for not making me talk if I didn't want to. His gaze softened, and he gave the slightest smile. Sometimes the best conversation is just letting someone breathe. I nodded and slipped into the small bedroom. The bed was simple, worn flannel sheets, a thick quilt, but it might as well have been a five-star hotel in that moment. I lay down and listened. Outside, the storm still murmured over the roof. But inside there was warmth. A faint creak as Wes moved around the cabin. The gentle hiss of fire. The comfort of another human being on the other side of a thin wooden wall. I come here to be alone. But tonight, I was strangely glad I wasn't. I woke to the sound of birdsong. Soft, tentative chirps outside the small cabin window, like the forest was testing its own voice again after the storm. Sunlight filtered through the glass, catching specks of dust floating above the bedside table. The air smelled like cedar smoke and something faintly sweet, pine, maybe. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered. The trail, the rain, the mud, and Wes. I stretched, the quilt falling from my shoulders, and sat up slowly. My body still ached from the fall, but the stiffness was familiar now, almost welcome. Real. When I stepped out into the main room, Wes was already up, barefoot, a mug of something steaming in his hand as he leaned against the open back door. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded toward the fresh clothes he'd left folded on the armchair. Dry jeans and a long-sleeve Henley that looked like it had been worn 100 times and washed 1,000 more. I changed, grateful, and joined him on the porch. The sky had cleared, but the trail was a mess. Puddles, broken branches, and thick globs of slick earth that made walking dangerous. Wes pointed out the washed-out path with a slight smirk. Unless you've got wings, you're not getting far today. I didn't mind. In fact, I was surprised at how relieved I felt. We spent the morning in a kind of quiet rhythm. Wes brewed strong coffee in a tin percolator over the fire while I flipped through an old paperback I found on his shelf. A dog-eared copy of Into the Wild. Fitting. After breakfast, he handed me a pair of gloves and said, "Come on. Time to earn your keep." I followed him out to a woodpile behind the cabin, where we spent the next hour splitting logs. I wasn't particularly good at it. My swing was off, my grip too tight. But Wes didn't laugh or correct me. He just worked alongside me, sweat glistening on his brow, the silence between us filled with birdsong and the thud of axe meeting wood. At one point, I paused to catch my breath and found him watching me. Not in a judgmental way, just observing, like he was still trying to figure me out. "What?" I asked, wiping my forehead with the sleeve of my borrowed shirt. He leaned on the handle of his axe, head tilted. "You don't seem like someone who hikes just to hike." I swallowed, unsure what to say. The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't even curious, really. It was a gentle nudge, an invitation to be honest. I sat down on a nearby stump, took a breath, and let it out slowly. "I guess I'm not." Wes didn't reply, just waited. "It was a breakup," I said. "Or the end of something that should have ended sooner. I stayed too long. Tried too hard to be someone I'm not." He moved to sit across from me on a large flat rock, elbows on his knees. "Was he good to you?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not really, but I wanted him to be. I kept thinking if I worked harder, communicated better, he'd show up." Wes nodded, slow and deliberate.
Sounds familiar.
I looked up, surprised. Yeah, he said. "I spent a lot of years twisting myself into someone else's version of what a man should be. Always on, always calm, always together. Until one day I realized I didn't recognize my own voice anymore." There was a long pause after that. Not heavy, just honest. "I came out late," I said, almost in a whisper. "I think I was still figuring out who I was when I met him, and I thought maybe he could tell me." Wes gave a quiet laugh. "We give people too much power when we're lonely." "Yeah," I said. And when I finally ended it, I felt like I didn't know where to go, like I just lost the map to everything. He looked at me then, really looked, not with pity, but with that calm, steady gaze that made it hard to look away. Sometimes losing the map is how you figure out where you actually want to be. I let his words settle inside me like a slow tide. We didn't talk much for the rest of the afternoon. It wasn't necessary. There was something easy in the way we moved around each other now. Sharing small tasks, passing tools without needing to speak, sitting side by side in comfortable silence. By nightfall, the fire was going again, and the cabin was warm with amber light. We sat across from each other, him on the crate, me in the armchair, the same blanket wrapped around my legs. Wes was reading something, but every now and then, I'd catch him glancing up, just a flick of the eyes before returning to the page. The air felt thick with something I couldn't name. Not tension, not exactly. More like potential. I sipped my tea slowly, watching the way the firelight flickered against the sharp line of his jaw, the way his lips parted slightly when he read something he liked. Every movement, every breath, felt heightened. He caught me staring once. Didn't smile. Didn't look away. He just met my eyes. For a second, I thought something would happen. That he'd stand, close the space between us, lift my face with a hand that had chopped wood and steadied storms. But he didn't. Instead, he closed the book gently, placed it on the table beside him and said, "You should get some sleep. Trail might be clearer tomorrow." I nodded. Right? Good idea. But neither of us moved right away. The fire crackled. The storm outside was gone. And yet, I didn't feel like I'd ever been more inside one. The next morning, the world looked rinsed clean. The forest, soaked and steaming in the early sun, seemed to exhale around us. A low mist hung between the trees like silk, and everything glistened: leaves, stones, even the spiderwebs strung between the branches. The chaos of the storm was gone, leaving behind a quiet that felt deeper than before. Still alive. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and found Wes tightening the straps on his pack. He glanced up. "Trails are better today." I nodded, still not sure if I was ready to leave. My body was, maybe, but something else had rooted itself in me. Something I wasn't ready to walk away from. Before I could speak, Wes straightened and said, "I want to show you something. It's not far. Maybe a mile up a side trail most people miss." I hesitated. "It's not dangerous," he added with a small grin. "No cliffs to fall off." "That's not what I'm worried about," I said without thinking, and then immediately wished I hadn't. He didn't press, just turned and started walking, glancing over his shoulder once. "You coming?" I followed. We moved through the forest in silence. The only sounds our boots crunching over pine needles and the distant calls of birds I didn't recognize. The air was crisp, edged with the scent of wet bark and earth. Wes took the lead, his stride easy, familiar with every twist of the trail. I watched him move, the way his shoulders rolled under his flannel, the way he stepped over roots without looking down. Felt good to be moving again. Better, maybe, to be moving with someone. Eventually, we came to a narrow path that veered off sharply from the main trail, nearly hidden behind a fallen tree. Wes ducked under the branches and motioned for me to follow. The climb was steep, more roots than dirt, the trail barely visible, but we moved in sync. He'd offer a hand now and then, and I'd take it, grateful for the steadiness, the unspoken ease. After 20 minutes or so, the trees began to thin. Light grew stronger. And then, without warning, we stepped out onto an overlook. I froze. Before us, the mountain rolled away in layers, ridgelines folding into one another like waves, soft blue and smoky green under the morning sun. A river curled through the valley far below, catching the light like silver thread. The sky was wide, open, endless. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Wes sat on a flat boulder and motioned for me to do the same. "This place saved me," he said quietly. I looked over. He was staring at the horizon, not at me. After everything fell apart back home, I came here. First time I was a mess. Couldn't think, couldn't sleep. Just walked for hours, trying to feel like something mattered again. I found this spot by accident. He paused. Sat here for 2 hours. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. I didn't speak. Just sat beside him and let the view do its work. We stayed there for a long time. No need to fill the silence. I watched the way the wind moved through the trees below, how the light shifted across Wes's face, softening him, outlining the line of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. At one point, he shifted closer. Our shoulders almost touched. Then our hands did. Barely. Just the lightest brush. My fingers grazing his as I adjusted my seat. Could have been nothing. Accidental. But I felt it like a shock. I pulled away instinctively. A heartbeat later, I regretted it. Wes didn't react. Didn't flinch. He just looked ahead and said, almost in a whisper, "It's okay. We don't have to name anything." I swallowed, throat suddenly tight. He wasn't trying to corner me. Wasn't asking for anything. He was just giving me space, the same way he had since that first night.
No expectations.
Just presence. The walk back was quieter. Not tense, but charged. I was too aware of the space between us now. Every time our arms swung just slightly too close, I felt it. Every glance I stole when he wasn't looking, I felt that too. Back at the cabin, the mood had shifted, not in a bad way, but in a way that felt fragile. Like we'd stood on the edge of something and then stepped back before it could break open. That evening, we cooked dinner in silence. Wes made a stew that tasted like it had been passed down through generations of woodsmen, hearty, peppery, alive. We sat by the fire afterward, each in our usual spots. He read. I pretended to read. The air between us pulsed with something unsaid. Not pressure, just possibility. At one point, he looked up from his book, met my eyes, and held them. That look, it was steady, open, waiting. Not demanding, just waiting. I looked away first. My chest ached with something I couldn't quite name. Longing, fear, hope, maybe all of them at once. The fire crackled. Rain tapped gently on the window, returning just for the night. And somewhere in that quiet, I realized I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I was afraid of not being. By the third morning, the trail had dried enough to leave. I knew it the moment I stepped outside. The sun warming the earth, the wind brushing gently through the treetops. The mud had hardened to packed soil, and even the birds sounded different, as if the world itself was nudging me forward. But I didn't leave. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't want to. Wes didn't ask me to stay, and I didn't ask if I could. It just happened. The hours slipped into days without either of us naming them. We settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind that made it easy to forget time altogether. We'd wake early, sometimes with the first light, sometimes not until the sun broke through the windows. We'd make coffee in silence, shoulder to shoulder in the small kitchen space, our hands brushing as we reached for mugs or passed the kettle. Then we'd head outside to chop wood or gather kindling or just walk the trail behind the cabin. There was something grounding about the routine. It wasn't dramatic or romantic in the way I used to imagine intimacy should be. It was better, real, warm, quiet. Wes would make a dumb joke while stirring stew, and I'd laugh harder than I had in months. I'd misstep on a slick rock, and he'd steady me with one hand, his touch so casual and natural it made my chest ache. We stargazed one night from the porch, sitting side by side on the steps with a shared blanket over our legs. The sky was so clear it didn't feel real. Stars sharp and endless, galaxies etched across the dark like a painting. I asked him if he ever missed the city lights. He shook his head. "Those lights never let you see what's already shining," he said. I didn't reply. I just looked at him instead. Each day brought us closer. But it wasn't the kind of closeness that crackled with nervous energy. It was slower than that, a deep pull like gravity. Like we were being drawn together not because of desire, but because of understanding. One night, after dinner, we sat by the fire, shoulders touching. Neither of us made a move to put space between us anymore. Wes stared into the flames for a long time, quiet. I didn't interrupt. Then he spoke. "There was someone," he said. "A few years ago." I turned slightly toward him, but he didn't look at me. We met through work. He was smart, magnetic. One of those people that makes you feel seen even in a crowded room. We fell fast, or maybe I just did. He said all the right things. Made me believe we had a future. His voice was steady, but I could feel the weight behind it. Turns out I was a good secret, not a good partner. He was out to me, but not to the rest of the world. And when the choice came between me and appearances, he picked safety. "I'm sorry," I said, barely above a whisper. Wes gave a soft, rueful laugh. "It's fine. I don't blame him. Not really. But I couldn't stay. So I left. Found this cabin and decided. Maybe being alone wasn't the worst thing." A silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, just full. I turned to him. "And if someone did love you back?" He finally looked at me. His eyes were steady, clear in the glow of the fire. "I'd probably never let him go," he said, voice low. I didn't breathe for a second. The fire popped. Somewhere outside, an owl called into the trees. Neither of us moved, but the air between us shifted, thicker, closer, no longer uncertain. I didn't know who leaned in first. Maybe we both did, meeting in the middle like we always had. There was no rush.
No urgency.
Just a quiet, patient gravity pulling us forward. Our lips touched gently. Not hungry, not dramatic. Just sure. His hand brushed my jaw, rough and warm. I let my fingers rest on his chest, feeling the slow rhythm of his heart. The kiss deepened slightly, still slow, still soft, like we were both afraid to wake from a dream. When we pulled back, our foreheads rested together, breaths mingling in the firelight. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. That night we didn't sleep together. Not in that way. I took the bed. He stayed on the couch. But it wasn't about distance anymore. It was about knowing, the kind of knowing that settles deep in your bones. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind rustle through the trees outside and the quiet creak of floorboards as Wes moved around the cabin. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time I wasn't scared of it. I was ready, and I knew if I had to, I could stay here forever. The call came in the late afternoon. I was out by the woodpile, stacking split logs into neat, satisfying rows when I heard the short, crackling ring of Wes's emergency radio inside the cabin. It wasn't the kind of sound you could ignore. I paused, listened, and waited. A minute passed. Then Wes stepped out onto the porch, rubbing the back of his neck. "That was the ranger station," he said, eyes not quite meeting mine. "Trails officially cleared." I nodded. "Okay." He didn't say anything else, and neither did I. We both knew what it meant. I could go back now. Back to whatever waited for me on the other side of the trees. There was no plan, no big goodbye speech, no promises made or broken. We kept working, side by side, as if the world hadn't just cracked open a little between us. That evening, Wes made dinner, lentils and fire-roasted vegetables, and we ate on the porch, watching the sun dip low over the hills. The sky turned molten gold, then indigo, then a soft bruise of purple. The breeze was warm. It smelled like pine sap and ash and something I couldn't name, something that would stay with me long after I left. After we cleaned up, we returned to our familiar spots inside. Him on the crate by the fire, me curled into the old leather armchair, the wool blanket still draped over my legs. The flames flickered and danced, casting long shadows across the walls. We didn't talk, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said. In glances, in silence, in the way our hands brushed when we passed plates or cups or leaned a little too close to the same corner of the counter. There was no tension, no regret, just presence. Still, later that night, after Wes had gone to the back room, giving me the bed again without asking, I stayed behind. The fire had dimmed to embers, glowing softly in the hearth. I pulled out my journal, the one I hadn't touched since the night I arrived, and tore out a blank page. I don't know why I wrote the note. Maybe I needed to put it somewhere outside of myself. Maybe I thought I'd give it to him. Or maybe I just needed the words to exist. "Wes, you reminded me that silence doesn't always mean emptiness. That being seen doesn't have to feel like exposure. You didn't save me, you let me breathe, and that was enough. Maybe more than enough. Thank you." Me. I folded it neatly and slid it into my bag. Then I stared at the fire until it gave up its last light. At dawn, the sky was painted in pale pinks and grays, the kind of morning that felt both endless and urgent. My bag was packed, my boots laced, and the air tasted sharp and damp, the world waking up just as I was about to leave it behind. Wes was already up. Of course he was. He stood by the trailhead with a thermos in hand and his hat pulled low, like the first time I saw him in the storm. We didn't hug right away. We just stood there, looking at each other, both of us waiting for the other to say something first. Finally, he took a step forward and pulled me in. His arms wrapped around me like they belonged there. Solid, warm, familiar. I rested my chin on his shoulder, closed my eyes, and let the quiet settle over us. When we pulled back, he held my gaze. "Take care of yourself," he said, voice low and tight around the edges. "You too," I said. Neither of us mentioned staying, or visiting, or what this had been or what it might become. Maybe we didn't need to. I turned toward the trail, adjusted the straps on my pack, took a breath, and then I started walking. The path looked different now. Not because the trees had changed or the rocks had moved, but because I had. The forest still whispered and hummed around me, but it no longer felt like a place to escape to. Felt like a place I had met myself in. I didn't get far before I looked back. Wes was still there, one hand lifted in a quiet wave. I raised mine too, just for a second, and then I kept walking. But I kept looking back, again and again, until the trees closed between us. And even after I couldn't see him anymore, I still felt him there. Somehow I knew he was watching too. Weeks passed. The city didn't change. The traffic still droned past my window in waves. People still walked too fast, and the sidewalks buzzed with a low, anxious energy that once felt normal. But I had changed. It wasn't anything dramatic. I didn't quit my job or suddenly find enlightenment. I still paid bills, sat in meetings, answered emails. But I moved differently now. I noticed things. Birdsong on the balcony in the morning. The The way sunlight warmed the hardwood in my kitchen just before noon. The rare, precious silence between subway cars when the tunnel swallowed sound. I could even hear my own breath sometimes. In still moments, in crowded rooms, and instead of feeling alone, it felt like company. Like I'd found a voice I forgot I had. There were moments I missed the cabin. Missed Wes. Of course I did. I missed the rhythm of chopping wood, the simplicity of firelight, the way he'd glance at me over the rim of his mug like he was still trying to figure me out and liked what he found. I missed not having to explain myself every minute of every day. And sometimes, late at night when the noise had finally died down, I'd reach into the drawer beside my bed and pull out the note. The one I never gave him. I unfolded it carefully, the creases worn from being handled too often. Wes, you reminded me that silence doesn't always mean emptiness. That being seen doesn't have to feel like exposure. You didn't save me, you let me breathe, and that was enough. Maybe more than enough. You helped me find my way back. Not just to the trail, but to myself. Me. Every time I read it, something in me softened. And yet I hadn't reached out. I told myself I was giving it time, letting it settle. But maybe I was just afraid. Afraid that the cabin had been a dream we'd both woken up from. That what we found in the woods couldn't survive the world outside it. But life has its own way of deciding when it's time. One evening, I was sitting on my couch, half watching some show I didn't care about, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it for a second, thumb hovering. Then I opened it. A single message. Spring's coming early this year. I was wondering if you'd want to see that view again. I read it twice. 3 times. No name. No punctuation. Just enough. I sat there in the glow of the screen, the noise of the world quieting around me. A slow smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Maybe I had been waiting for a sign. Maybe this was it. I closed my eyes, letting the memory of that mountaintop fill me. The wind, the trees, his voice in the silence beside me. I didn't know what would happen next. Didn't need to. All I knew was this. I wasn't lost anymore. I had just been walking the wrong trail. I used to think I was lost. But maybe I just hadn't found the right path yet. Did this story move you? If you've ever found yourself lost, in love, in life, or somewhere in between, you're not alone. Leave a comment if you believe in quiet love, second chances, and finding your way back to yourself. Subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this one. Like if you've ever met someone who changed your path in the most unexpected way. And don't forget to turn on notifications. Your next favorite story might be just around the bend.